Hao Ye is an ugly, invisible loser who suddenly gets noticed by all the girls when the school baddie eats his chocolates and wants him for herself. Now, he uses his riz to pick any girl he wants and fulfill their desires. But this all begins one day when Hao Ye sits in class and Zetong, the hottest girl in school, suddenly walks up to him and says she's pregnant with his baby. But he's unwilling to pay child support and says he doesn't know what the crazy bitch is talking about, which angers the class, causing him to run away. As the rest of the school hears the news, he tries to hide from the mob, but runs into Zetong again and tells her to meet him on the roof. Then he tries to escape the mob, but when he gets tired of running, he grabs a mop and wipes them all out. However, he gets pulled into the girls' bathroom, where the captain of the girls' sports team, Tong, smacks the shit out of him, telling him how heartbroken she is over the news, and threatens to crush his balls if he goes back to Zetong. When they leave the bathroom, Ling begs him to come home to her and the kids, but when he asks who the fuck she's talking about, she smacks him around till Tong stops her, ready to throw down over her man. Then a crowd gathers and he uses the opportunity to run away.
I'm fast as fuck, boy.
But the crowd notices and chases him to the roof, where he threatens to jump off if they don't back off. But when they think he's bluffing, he figures his existence was meaningless anyway and lets go, but suddenly, time stops around him and hot goddess Mei appears in front of him, asking if he's the idiot who ate Cupid's chocolates. Then he remembers that he did find a cake that he shared with a classroom full of girls, and realizes that he's completely fucked. So she introduces herself as the god of love and congratulates him for finally getting some, but he cusses her out for ruining his peaceful life with these lunatic girls. So she tells him he can lift the magic if he fulfills their most desired wish. Then she leaves, and Tan goes back to normal. So he continues to hide from his unwanted harem, till he remembers that Zetong is stupid enough to jump off the building also. At this, he runs back to the rooftop to find her crying and asks her to follow him out later. The next day, he takes her to a hospital while some aunties call him scum for not using protection. But as she sleeps, he wishes he had stuck his sausage in her rice cakes. Then a nurse shows him her test results, confirming she's not pregnant. But when Zetong suggests they try again, he offers to meet with her parents. So she takes him home, and when he sees the mansion, he realizes the bitch is loaded and wonders how he could possibly fulfill her desires. Then a servant welcomes them home, and he tells her he's just a friend. So she informs him that Zetong lives all alone because her father is never around, which makes him happy that he's dodged a bullet. However, another servant barges in and reports that he had knocked up Zetong, so she orders the men to beat his ass till learns how to use protection. Then Zetong pleads with the guards to stop, claiming they're actually in love, but when they take one look at his butt-ugly face, they continue to stomp on him till he ends up flying over to Zetong. So she grabs him and leads him to her room, hoping to make another baby.
Yes! Yes!
But when he tries to finally get some, he panics and looks away.
No! No!
Then he spots her old calendar and sees that she clearly has daddy issues and realizes what he must do. So he leaves the room and grabs the servant's phone to tell her father that he knocked up his daughter and invites him to meet him face to face. Later, her father arrives, and when he sees his ugly face, he tells his men to stomp his ass again. And as they carry out their order, she shows him the results from the hospital, proving he's innocent. So he calls off his men, and when he asks him what this is all about, Hao Ye calls him out on being a neglectful father, telling him all she wants is to have meals with him. While her father reconsiders his life choices, Hao Ye runs faster than Sonic. But when he stops to catch his breath, Zetong catches up to him.
What?
And is about to thank him with a sloppy wet kiss, but she disappears before he can get any. Then Mei appears and tells him the magic's been lifted, and he's glad he can finally return to his boring life. The next day, he trips and finds a missing poster of him, created by his fake wife and kids, and realizes his life is still hell. So he finds a way to sneak into class, where Zetong finds him and is still completely in love with him. So he calls out for Mei, and when she appears, he asks why he's still going through this bullshit. But she explains that whatever feelings she has now are real and unfreezes time. So he agrees to go out with her, but knives suddenly come flying toward him, and Shuli appears, overflowing with a murderous aura over his cheating. But when he claims it's a misunderstanding, she sticks her tongue down his throat to make Zetong get the message. But before she can get to third base, her mom appears and tells her to go back to America. However, when Shuli refuses, it turns into a Mortal Kombat fight, where she knocks her flat on her ass and orders her men to carry her out. So he thanks her for keeping her daughter in check, but she advises him to get life insurance. Later, Mei appears and asks about Shuli, so he tells her she's a childhood friend who has always been crazy. But he's interrupted when he realizes Zetong's behind him and confirms their date for the next day. Later in school, he runs into Tong, who slaps him and breaks up with him. So he tells her that attitude wouldn't help her land any man. Then Medi appears, and after telling her what happened, he asks if he can solve the problem by breaking up with everyone. But she tells him that he knows nothing about women and leaves. Later, he finds her torturing the boys' sports team for losing a bet and tries to fight her off, making her wet. So she walks off angrily, while the boys thank him for saving their lives. The next day, he wakes up and finds he's late, as he suddenly sees Hao Ye in bed with him, and she asks if he's late for a date. But when he denies this, she locks him in his room, so he climbs out through neighbor's apartment. Meanwhile, Zetong waits for him, but when she remembers that sloppy kiss, she realizes she can't compete with that and plans to end things with him. Then he arrives, and they sit down for some drinks, but they have nothing to say, so to save them from dying from awkwardness, he suggests they go to an anime festival nearby. Back at home, Hao Ye finds that he's gone and plans to hunt him down, while he and Zetong continue to explore the festival, but they suddenly run into Tong, who's servicing the fans. While the sweaty fanboys surround them, she notices her teammates in the distance and drags Hao Ye and Zetong with her to get away, just as Hao Ye arrives at the venue with a giant blade. Back at the festival, Tong tells them that when her teammates were new to the school, they were bullied for being a crime to look at, so she beat up the guys to defend them, and now she can't let them see her servicing the boys again, but he tells her to just be herself. As they announce the cosplay competition, she tells them she needs 2 more members to participate for her to be eligible, so Zetong volunteers them to help. So they dress him up as an ugly, disgusting rabbit. And when he's checking himself out, Hao Ye takes a picture to add to her collection. Suddenly, Tong cries out after finding that her dress for the competition is ruined, but when he asks why she doesn't just wear her current clothes, she tells him to f off and runs away, while the 3 jealous bitches that ruined her dress watch. After, Zetong tells him that was the dress she wore when she first won and finds it irreplaceable, so he makes up his mind to win the competition for her. But he makes a quick stop to take a leak and Medi shows up and says she didn't know he was into kinky shit. But as he looks at her large melons, he suddenly has an idea. So the competition starts and he tries to stall till Medi or Zetong can find Tong. But when he runs out of time, he tries to perform alone while she watches from above. Then she accidentally falls over, but Medi shows up just in time to transform their costumes and help her land safely in his arms, winning them the competition. Then Hao Ye shows up and takes out her rage on the jealous bitches from earlier. After they get some alone time, they get undressed. But when he sees how huge her melons are, she gets embarrassed and bitch slaps him, throwing him out of the room. When Medi appears, he asks her why she didn't warn him that the clothes would disappear. But she gets distracted by his tiny sausage and finds it difficult to concentrate. Then she confesses that she's also a loser and is pretty terrible at magic. So he uses their mutual loser status to rise her up, making her forget she's a literal goddess. Then Zetong appears, reminding him he's the worst first date a girl could ever have.
Emotional, damn it!
So he takes her to the train station, but tells her he has something to take care of and returns for Tong. When he gets to her, he asks her if she'd like to sleep with him that night, but she calls him a cultured man and runs away, so he guesses the magic has been lifted. After striking out, he heads to an apartment where Miss Jai opens the door, surprised to see him since he hasn't been there in a while. As he walks through her apartment, he wonders how a woman can be living such an indecent life, but she asks him what he wants to do late in the night, wondering if it has anything to do with Hao Ye again. Then he remembers that ever since elementary school, he spent his days being a punching bag for Hao Ye, because he always did better on his tests, so he started failing on purpose, which made her happy. But one day, she tried to force him to go to America with her, and made a bet that he'd have to come if she scored higher than him on their next exam, so he had to make sure the crazy bitch went alone, and ended up being the highest in the class, losing her the bet. In the present, he tells Ms. Jia that he'd need her help studying again, and she wonders what girl he's doing this for too. Meanwhile, Zetong reads a text from him and thinks he's so charming, just as he's about to get in on with Ms. Ji. But she ends up passing out from being too drunk. The next day, as Tong trains the sports teams, Hao Ye shows up and challenges her and the entire girls' team to a bet that he can score highest on the school midterm. And if he does, they'll have to do whatever he says. Since the girls think he's a dumbass, they accept the challenge, and he agrees to return in a week. Afterward, he begins to study as Zetong watches, and just as she thinks his diligence is cute, she overhears the guys behind explain that he's doing this all for Tong, and she realizes that he's just not that into her. The night before the exams, he notices Hao Ye outside in the rain, and when he goes to meet her, she tells him he's back and cries in his arms. The next day, as he rides to school, he remembers how he dropped her off with her mom, who says she's been even more unstable than usual. When he gets to school, Zetong notices he's really tired, and Tong even suggests he might be able to back out, but he continues to walk forward. And when the exam begins, he blazes through the questions and finishes first. Later, he approaches the team with a maid's outfit for Tong to wear since he's sure he's won the bet. And when the girls check, to their surprise, he places first with a perfect score. All of the girls give him shit for being a disgusting cultured man. Tong realizes what he's done for her and remains speechless. Later, other students line up for a chance to look under her skirt, while he announces to the school that she'll have to service the fans for the next 2 weeks. So she finds him on the roof later and tells him she's happy he's a perverted idiot. After that, he walks down the hall with Mehdi, who asks who Shuali was referring to earlier, so he tells her about Shuali's ex-boyfriend who fucked her up. But before he can get to the juicy details, 2 kids tackle him from behind, calling him daddy, as Ling appears behind them. When he asks who they are, she confirms they're his kids, and his soul begins to leave his body until Mehdi drags it back to hell, and he's forced to promise the kids he'll come home that night, but makes them promise to call him uncle when they're outside. Afterward, he confronts Mehdi, and she explains that the main purpose of Cupid's contract is to help people fulfill their wishes, but if the contract is left unfulfilled for long, their wishes will come true. At the same time, Ling takes the kids to the front of the school but receives a phone call requiring her immediate attention. So she tells them to wait for her till she returns, but immediately she leaves, Ming runs off and Hong chases after him. Later she tells Hao Ye the kids are gone, and they agree to split up and look for them. Meanwhile, Zetong finds Hong and agrees to help her find her uncle while Ming wreaks havoc all over the school, eventually running into the girls' changing room. When Hao Ye sees this, he tries to check if he's really in there, but Tong catches him peeping red-handed. As Zetong attends to Hong, she hears some students mentioning Hao Ye in another situation and wonders if she has poor taste in men. Back at the changing room, Tong tells him it's only okay to be perverted toward her, not other girls, asking him to apologize. But when Ming tries to come to his rescue, he pulls off her dress again, giving him a good view of heaven.
That's pretty good.
And Zetong arrives with Hong and wonders what the fuck is going on. Later, he finally returns the kids to Ling, and after she thanks him, he tries to remind her that they're only 20 years old and couldn't possibly have kids that are around 8 years old. But when she remains clueless, Mehdi appears and tells him that if this continues to go on, other people she interacts with will have their memories altered. So he follows her home and meets her crazy hot mother, who also remembers him as a deadbeat father. And when he enters, he notices they're kinda broke. Her mom leaves, and after putting the kids to bed, Ling tries to get him to make baby number 3, and just as he starts to get hard, his phone rings. When he hears Zetong's voice, he immediately gets soft and agrees to go out with her on Sunday. But after he gets off the phone, Ling tells him they need some family bonding time on Sunday and should go to the same park. After realizing he's fucked, he wonders if he should pick between dumping a rich heiress or telling his kids he needs to buy milk, but he decides to pick his kids. However, when he calls Zetong to cancel the date, he changes his mind and plans to run both dates at the same time. The next Sunday, they get to the park at 9 a.m., and he plans to take them on as many rides as possible before he meets up with Zetong by 10. Even though he almost shit himself on every ride, he manages to spend the hour with his family and then runs across the park to meet Zetong. When she sees him, she tries to confess her feelings but is interrupted by a photographer who asks them if they'd like their pictures taken, so they agree, and she rubs her melons against him. Suddenly, the wind blows her hat off and he catches it for her, allowing her to plant one on him to show her appreciation. After he runs to the toilet, Mehdi appears, and he asks her if the chocolate is somehow still affecting her, but she tells him he's dense. So he runs off and tries to get some presents for the kids as they wait for him, but he runs into Dong, who tells him that Shuali's ex is back from America and tells him to take care of her. At the same time, he runs into Tong, and when his phone starts to ring, he asks her for a little favor. Afterward, Tong finds Zetong and explains that Hao Ye asked her to keep her company while he does something important, so she asks if they were on a date, but Zetong denies this, and things get more awkward. Meanwhile, he finally returns to his family but finds Hong crying cause she wants ice cream, but Ling has to explain that her daddy is a broke loser who can't afford child support, and after hearing this, he enters a quiz competition and wins the kids some free ice cream. Afterward, they sit and talk, and after she thanks him for doing his best for the kids, but he notices her sad expression and decides to ask her something. Later on, Zetong and Tong continue their awkward date when they see Hao Ye with Ling and the kids, but after he stays behind, they ambush him and tie his hands, and Tong calls him a scumbag for using her. So he explains that when he had been with Ling, he asked her about her father, and after he figured out that he never came back from buying milk, she got upset and refused to talk to him. Upon hearing this, the girls feel bad for her and let him off with a warning, allowing him to go to her. When he gets to her, he sees the photographer again and asks him to take their family picture. But when he realizes he's the same guy, he wonders how he's still single if this loser can juggle 2 baddies. Later, he walks Ling home, but she warns him not to bring her father up with her mom. So he decides to investigate other people she might have been close to. The next day, he heads to her elementary school, but everyone thinks he has the face of a pervert, so they try to hold him down. But when he escapes, he trips and falls onto a teacher's huge melons, proving them right. However, after hearing that he's looking for Ling's teacher, she sits down with him and tells him that her father suddenly disappeared after years of being a good dad, which wrecked Ling. With this information, he plans to find her father and heads to the police station, where he meets Yan and asks him to help find her dad. So he leaves him to it and heads back home to find his parents looking sad, but they're unable to tell him what's going on. Suddenly, Hao Ye arrives and drags him to the bedroom, while his dad tells him it's time to test his game and wishes him luck. In his room, Hao Ye tells him they should further the plot, but since he has a tiny sausage, he escapes and waits for her to fall asleep. Then Yan calls and informs him that he's found 20 possible numbers, so later, he tries all the options but strikes out till he reaches the last. But when he calls, he gets no answer. Later that day, he calls again and finally gets a hold of Yuija, tells him he's his son-in-law, and calls him out for being a shitty dad. But then he drops the bomb that Ling is not actually his daughter. This surprises him, so he heads to Ling's house just as she finishes an argument with her mom and runs off. But her mom also refuses to talk about him. Desperate for answers, he runs into an old woman who gives him all the tea, causing him to be depressed. When Minnie asks what's got him down, he explains that Ling's mother had originally married a sergeant who ended up dying on duty, leaving her pregnant and alone. However, Yuji was willing to be a rebound and offered to take care of her and her baby despite his parents' wishes. But after they nagged him hard enough, he divorced her and disappeared. After narrating the story, he says that he no longer wants to be involved with all of their bullshit and gives up. But when she tries to convince him there's still hope, he tells her to leave him alone. Then he heads home, but when he sees the family picture, he realizes he's being a dickhead and decides to try again. Later, as he continues to call Yuija, he asks Mei if the magic has dissipated since he hasn't been pestered by any new girls, but she tells him that the magic in an area works one case at a time. He then remembers he was supposed to meet up with Ling and the kids and heads to the school. After picking them up, they try to cross the street, but Ling accidentally steps in front of a moving truck. Afterward, an ambulance arrives and quickly rushes them to the hospital. While Yuija receives a phone call informing him that his daughter is in critical condition, he immediately rushes down, while Tong and Zetong wait outside the surgery room and soon receive an update from the doctor. When Yuija finally arrives at the hospital, he tries to find Ling, but overhears a doctor saying that a young girl didn't make it, which leaves him devastated. But just as he begins to regret never bringing the milk home, Ling shows up behind him and jumps in his arms, saying the expired milk doesn't matter anymore. Meanwhile, Hao Ye wakes up, and the last thing he remembers is pushing Ling out of the way and getting hit instead. As he fades in and out of consciousness, he sees his kids, and they say their final goodbyes since Ling's desire has been fulfilled. A month later, he's finally released from the hospital, and just as he thinks things are looking up for him, he steps in shit. Suddenly, Zuli arrives and says she's come to pick him up, but Zetong, Tong, and Ling all show up, hoping to do the same thing. While the girls face off, he tries to sneak away, but Zuli distracts them and orders her men to kidnap him so they get away. Meanwhile, Mei relaxes after thinking her work with Hao Ye is finally over, but she suddenly hears a commotion as another Hao Ye-obsessed crackhead is about to jump off the building and eventually ends up in the hospital. While she enjoys her break, she sees a couple having an argument and tries to use her magic to help them make up, but it backfires horribly, making them split up instead. Afterward, each girl tries to visit Hao Ye, but finds their competition there also, and as they argue about who is more important to him, Ling reminds them that he literally jumped in front of a truck for her, winning her the round. After, they barge into his apartment but find him taking back shots from Dong, and realize he's also into men. This makes Tong furious, and she smacks him in the face, but when Shuali tries to defend him, her arm gets stuck between her giant cannons. So they all sit at the table, and the girls present their soups, but as each one tries to one-up the other, a fight breaks out, and Hao Ye ends up giving the soups to his neighbors to end the fighting. Then, Dong helps him to dress up and asks why he doesn't accept Shuali's advances, even though he's loved her since they were kids, but he says he doesn't want to be a substitute in her eyes. When he's left alone, Manny shows up and complains that she's still a loser like him who can't get her magic right, but Shuali manages to hear her voice and barges in to see who he's talking to. As the other girls come in, Shuali spots a part of Mei's dress, so Mei freezes time since that's not supposed to be possible. But as she tries to undo her mistake, she accidentally gives Hao Ye a free OnlyFans subscription. Later, she tells him her powers must be malfunctioning because he hasn't solved all the problems of the girls who ate the cake. But as he's about to leave her to her mess, he hears Sandy on the TV calling out for him. Suddenly, he gets transported to a strange place where Sandy appears, and when he wonders how the that's possible, May explains that the chocolates must be making her imagination real. Then Sandy tells him to follow her to a fancy world, and when he takes her hand, she flies off with him. As they ride through the skies full of large animals, he asks her what he means to her, and she tells him he's her childhood sweetheart, who encouraged her to become a star and then takes him to a tree portal to her new world. However, Maddie warns him that if he continues to indulge her, she'll lead him to another dimension, so he tries to stall for time by getting ice cream. But when she thinks she sees a jellyfish, she transports them to an aquarium. As they watch the dolphins from afar, she plans to take them with her, but he tells her she's being a selfish brat, which makes her sad, and her magic begins to break apart, so he tells her they can go to her fancy world the next day. Later, May tells him that Sandy's actually in a hospital, and he's been talking to her spirit the whole time. So if lets her go to her fancy world, her real body would die. So he says he'd use his time to find a way to convince her to stay. Back at home, he finds Sandy waiting for him to give her some, but when she looks at his pants, she decides to give him a song she wrote for him instead and leaves. Then, Maddie shows up and insists they can't let her die, so he tells her he might have a plan, but it involves her getting violated. Afterward, he finds Sandy at the portal and tries to convince her to stay, but she refuses and runs into the portal. So he chases after her and finds that her fancy world has become dark and lifeless. So he takes her hand and shows her a recap of the anime, explaining that all the other girls have found hope thanks to the goddess of love, and she can too, if she comes with him. So she agrees, but he tells her she needs to answer some questions first. Afterward, he uses the help of Ling, Zetong, and Tong to create a massive awareness of Sandy and her mistreatment by her agency. Then he tracks down her childhood friend, Ji, who tells him that since he grew up with Sandy and was the only one she would ever listen to, her agency ended up paying him to pretend to be her friend while keeping her away from interacting with anyone else, leaving her in a permanent childlike state. However, after 10 years of keeping up the act, he was tired of constantly babysitting her and wanted a life of his own, which she overheard. With this information, Hao Ye meets with her sleazy agent Wang, and after playing the recording, he demands that he give her the freedom to be who she wants to be. But Wang refuses to budge until Hao Ye brings out evidence of his affair with another woman, reminding him that his wife is a manager of his company. Meanwhile, as Zetong hopes Hao Ye will reward her for her help, she sees a reminder of her grandfather's birthday, which she's dreading. Then she hears on the news that Sandy has finally woken up from her coma and is requesting for Hao Ye to meet her. Later, Hao Ye tries to enter the hospital, but it's swarming with paparazzi who are on the lookout for him, so Mehdi helps him with a disguise, and he's able to sneak into her room. There he introduces her to Mehdi, who transports them all over the world to have a fun-filled day. And when they settle down, May explains the situation with the chocolate, and Sandy tells her she doesn't mind since she's gone on a wild adventure. Then she asks Mehdi about her magic, and she explains that the love gods used to use bows and arrows. But the director came up with the idea for a chocolate factory, which made things easier for them. After realizing that meeting them was only because of the chocolate, Sandy wonders if anyone would like her real self and her original music, and Mehdi assures her that she's widely loved and should go for it. Later, Sandy announces that she'll be going abroad to study, but will hold a solo concert before then to show her appreciation for those who gave her their support. On the day of the concert, she visits Sandy and apologizes for how things played out, but she tells him that they'd both been suffering for the last 10 years and should try to be real friends again, and he agrees. So the concert begins, and she presents her Cupid's chocolate-inspired song, but while she performs, she heads to where Hao Ye is sitting and whispers a thank you in his ears. Unfortunately for him, the audience goes crazy and takes pictures of them, which makes the news. The next morning, he hides in the bushes as he remembers how he had been chased by a mob after the concert and almost murdered by Xutali, and now has no place to go. Then she walks by, and after asking for her help, she takes him to a discreet location where he can finally get some rest. But when he wakes up, he sees a mysterious man in front of him, who tells him Jia already ditched his ass. While they talk, Zetong calls to make sure he's okay, and he tells her where he is. So the man asks if she's his girlfriend, but when Hao Ye denies it, he offers him a magic candy box. After Zetong arrives, he finds that the man has disappeared. Just as Mehdi watches from outside, then the man appears in front of her, and she recognizes him as Director Rias. So he tells her she'd be stripped of all her powers overnight for revealing herself to a mortal. But when she begs him to help her, he agrees and uses his magic to give her a patch to help control her magic, warning her not to intervene with the mortals again, or she'll lose her magic. Meanwhile, Hao Ye watches as Sandy clears up the rumors of him being her boyfriend, and is relieved he can finally go outside. But he suddenly gets a text and asks Zetong if she wears some pajamas for him, and she realizes the pervert rumors are true. Later, she agrees after finding out it's for his cousin, and they visit a lingerie store, where he gets another free stream of her OnlyFans account, and he struggles to keep it in his pants. Later, they get ambushed by a group of guys with one of the girls from the anime fest, who's seeking revenge, but since he's sick of getting his ass beat all the time, he decides to show his strength and wipe the floor with them, as Zetong calls the police. When the police arrive, they arrest the guys, and when she explains that she didn't know he wasn't completely a weak loser, he tells her that Hao Ye's father is actually the chief of police, but this makes him sad, and he walks off. So she chases after him and tries to ask questions, but he tells her to drop it and hands her a drink, as a mysterious man watches from a tree. Later, he decides to open up and tells her that when he was a kid, he wanted to be a policeman too and studied hard to be at the top of his class, but his parents always neglected him, even on his birthdays. During an incident when he was 11, some men tried to break in and end him, and when he called the police for help, he expected that his dad would rush over, but he sent a colleague instead. After the incident, they moved to a new neighborhood where he met Ji, and she ended up tutoring him and looking after him like a big sister. Then she met with his parents to encourage them to get their shit together, but nothing really changed, so he started to put up a front that their family was fine, just for her sake. After hearing this, Zetong feels sad for him and embraces him while Medi watches, and as she flies off, she cries and realizes that she's caught feelings for him too. Then Crow, who clearly has a thing for her, shows up and begs her to follow him back to their world, but she refuses, claiming that she has to find the girl who left the chocolate on the roof in the first place. Later, Hao Ye relaxes in his room when he receives a call from Zetong, who says Tong needs their help. 2 hours ago, Zetong had met up with her at another anime festival and met her new teammates, but she suddenly realized that she had forgotten her crown in school. So as she left to get it, it started raining, leaving her stuck at the bus stop. So Hao Ye sprints to the school to get her crown, but runs into Mei, who is heartbroken that he's in love with Zetong. But when he tells her he still belongs to the streets, she fixes up and decides to help him. So he reaches Tong at the bus stop with an umbrella and carries her to the event so she can make it on time. And just when the crowd gets bored of Zetong's face, Tang finally shows up and pleases the crowd. Afterward, she thanks Zetong for helping her, but begins to feel like a third wheel when both of them ignore her existence to flirt. Later, Mei flies around his room while he receives a couple of packages she ordered and reminds him that his school is going camping. The next day, as Hao Ye prepares for the trip, Zetong asks him to write his name for the draw, but she gives him a marked paper that she and Tong prepared so they would end up on the same team and have a three-way. However, Ling overhears their plan and also marks her paper with the same color, forcing Tong to choose all three as her teammates. So they hike through the forest while Hao Ye lags behind from carrying so much weight and tells Mei to get her fat ass off him, so she leaves to do some exploring. Later, they reach their campsite, and as they set up, Ling and Zetong both make him dinner, and Tong tells him to choose which to eat. But before he can choose, he gets a call from Zuli, who tells him she's coming to join them and immediately lands in their camp. When she sees the other three girls, she asks him why he's spending time with them and tosses their dinner to the floor, which makes Tong mad as she tells her off. So Zuli tries to end her and starts to chase her around camp, and she accidentally sets their stuff on fire. So Zetong rushes to get water to put it out, but ends up falling in the river. And when Tong tries to save her, she gets pulled in too. So he rushes to help them. But when Zuli tries to stop him, Ling face slaps her and warns her that Hao Ye will end up hating her if she doesn't get her shit together. Then she pulls out a map and shows her where they're likely to get out of the river, and suggests they meet up with them there. Meanwhile, Hao Ye runs along the river, wondering where Mei is when he needs her, but she's stuck on the other side of the forest since she has lost her magic. So Tong and Zetong begin to sink below the surface, but he jumps in and gets them to a nearby rock. But when they're unable to hold on, he tells them to hold on to his legs instead. At the same time, Ling and Zuli make their way through the forest, and she cries over how useless she is. But Ling tells her to get over it and change if she doesn't want him to drop her dead weight. Meanwhile, Hao Ye manages to get the girls to safety, and they warm up by the fire till Ling and Zuli finally find them. So they continue to warm up as Mei watches and wonders if Hao Ye needs her anymore, while the girls argue over who gets to sleep with him, but he suggests that they all sleep together instead. The next morning, Zuli tries to do it with Hao Ye again, but Tong stops her, and they start their usual fight till Zetong's dress gets ripped from trying to separate them. So he tells them to knock it off, but suddenly Ling faints, and they realize she needs immediate medical attention. By a stroke of luck, Zuli's mom arrives, and after Zuli explains the situation, they carry Ling on their helicopter while she tells him that a car will come by to pick the rest of them up. When they leave, he notices that Zetong is exposed and begins to take off his clothes in another perverted move. Later, he prepares for Zetong's arrival, since she wants to return his clothes. And when he hears a knock, he opens the door but finds Dong there and tells him now is not the time for a sneaky link. But Dong refuses to leave and asks him if he's decided to accept Suli, as he'd want to pursue her himself if Hao Ye is not interested. But when Hao Ye says he hasn't decided, Dong gives him hell for stringing her along, as well as Zetong. Just then, Zetong arrives to hear this, so Dong leaves, and she asks Hao Ye what exactly happened between him and Suli. So he tells her that after he started failing tests on purpose for her, they started to grow apart. But Dong, who was clearly in love with her, managed to keep them close together until Suli started dating a senior Yus and pretending Hao Ye didn't exist. However, on the night of their school dance, Yus announced that he was engaged to another girl right in front of Suli and publicly disgraced her. So she ended up dropping out of school. So he went to visit her and cheer her up. But when he got there, she stuck her tongue down his throat and asked him to never leave her, making her into the crazy bitch she is today. After the story, Zetong asks if he's sure he's not in love with Suli, but he assures her that once he deals with Yus, he'll inform her of their relationship. Later, she runs into Yus again, and though she tries to avoid him, he follows her and says he needs her to convince her mom to support his business for old time's sake. When she returns home, she tries to hide herself away in fear, but remembers Ling's words of encouragement, so when he calls again, she tells him to go f*** himself, but he threatens to harm Hao Ye instead. After, he gets Hao Ye to meet him in a parking lot where there's no service. So when Suli tries to reach him, she's unsuccessful and rushes out to save him. However, Mei happens to be flying nearby and notices her getting kidnapped, so she finds Hao Ye and tells him about this, while Yus threatens to send nudes of Zetong to her mother to blackmail her into working with them. At the same time, Mei leads Hao Ye to the hideout spot, and he asks her to record what's about to happen so they can have solid evidence to give to the police. So he breaks in and tells Yus to let her go. But when he threatens to hurt her, Hao Ye has no choice but to get whooped yet again in his own anime. However, when Suli sees that he's about to get seriously hurt, she steps in to protect him as she remembers how things got this complicated. When they were kids, she liked Hao Ye, but her mom fucked up her chances by telling her she needed to be better than him at everything. However, her plan backfired as it caused him to pull away. So on Valentine's Day, she tried to gift him some chocolates, but no one would believe that she would like such a loser, and instead of telling the truth, she played along and gifted them to Yus instead. Upon hearing this, Yus confesses that he always knew she liked Hao Ye and decided to make her pay since he felt so humiliated. But Hao Ye interrupts and apologizes for also being so passive over the years. Then he signals to Mei to upload the video, which they also receive on their phones. Then Hao Ye takes them out, and the police arrive to take them away. But in a last-ditch effort, Yus tries to stab Hao Ye, but Suli jumps in the way and gets stabbed instead. Later at the hospital, Zetong tries to comfort him, but he brushes her off, saying she wouldn't understand. Then, Suli's mom shows up and slaps him, blaming him for Suli's state. But her dad soon comes to get her and apologizes, explaining that crazy runs in the family. Afterward, she wakes up, and they go to see how she's doing, but she says can't remember who Hao Ye is. So her parents leave the room, and he reminds her who he is and promises to protect her forever. Then she stops the act and tells him he's got to keep his promise, while the other girls barge in and tell her that's cheating. Suddenly, a girl walks up behind them and clings to Hao Ye, claiming that he belongs to her instead, and when the girls complain that their harem is full enough, he explains that she's his cousin, Chiotu, and they head home together. There, he hands her the pajamas Zetong picked out, but they end up being too PG-18, so she jumps on him and asks him to give it to her. But he tells her when she's older and tucks her in bed. The next day, Sandy comes to check on him after hearing about the last incident. But when he realizes that the paparazzi will continue to stalk his house because of her, he cross-dresses again and they leave, thinking she's just visiting a female friend. At school, the girls notice that Hao Ye is tired and wonder what he did last night. So Chiotu taunts them, claiming they made love all night. This angers Tong, and she demands that he explain himself. And when the other girls back her up, he refuses to explain and tells them to mind their business and leaves. Later, Zetong asks Chiotu to meet with her and tell her more about his problems with his parents so she can find a way to help him. But she tells her to back off and reveals that she is Hao Ye's first ever girlfriend. After this, Zetong reports to the girls, and they can't believe their ears, but she suggests that they ask Dong about it, and he also confirms the statement. So as the girls try to figure out what to do, Chiotu approaches them and explains that she's not actually an obnoxious bitch, and explains how it all started. When they were kids, she had gone to visit him right after the attempted kidnapping incident, and he had given up on his dreams of being a policeman because his father didn't care whether he lived or died. and cared only about his job. After realizing he was in a lot of pain, she stuck by his side, played the role of his girlfriend in a school play when no one else wanted to partner with him, and also got Dong to become friends with him. So she tells him that she only wanted to make sure that the girls were truly his friends and asks for their forgiveness. Later, Zetong shows up at his place and tells him CO2 is trying to leave without saying goodbye. So they rush to the airport, but when they realize she'd already be on the plane, they tell the driver to take a shortcut while the other girls help clear his path and May uses her magic so she can hear him. Then he's finally able to thank her for all she's done for him and tell her goodbye. After she leaves, the girls go back to their usual bickering, while May watches from above and reveals that he hasn't dealt with all of Cupid's chocolates yet. Will Hao Ye ever declare his love for any of the girls? Or will a hotter contender show up in Season 2? Let us know if you want Part 2 by commenting Cupid's chocolates in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you guys in the next video.